I'm William Hart, and I'm at the Biosystems Engineering Department at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. This is Mr. Darol Copley, retired from the Milan Research and Education Center. What we'd like to do today is talk to you about the basic setups of a no-till planter. And what I'd like to do first of all is go through and talk about overall and outline the components, and then come back and talk individually with the assistance of Darol and talk about the adjustments of the planter for varying field conditions. We rely on our planter to establish a crop, and a planter unit serves several functions, one of which is the planter actually does minimum tillage in order to prepare a seed bed for the crop to be planted into. Then it has to have good seed to soil contact, and then once the seed is placed, it needs to be covered with soil and not compacted. The basics of a planter is, number one, is operating in a level position. So starting from front to rear, we have a toolbar on the planter, and that controls basically all the individual components of the planter. You can't make one adjustment on a planter without it affecting the other components along the line. So we start out with a level toolbar, and then as we look at the components, and we'll come back and talk about individually how to adjust those things, but depending on crop conditions, depending on the soil, depending on the residue of the previous crop, some planters are equipped with row cleaners, and these row cleaners' primary purpose is to remove the residue out from in front of the row crop planter. Now, also behind that, we have a no-till Coulter, and again, depending on the crop conditions, whether there's lots of residue or not a lot of residue, some planters will use these no-till Coulters, and some people prefer not to use those. But they make the initial slice into the soil surface so that your double disc openers can actually create a furrow for the seed to drop. Now, these units must be adjusted to the proper height such that you have these down pressure wheels that you adjust the pressure on those, and they in effect control the depth of the seed placement. After the down pressure wheels, then you have the press wheels that basically firm up the soil around the seed, and that's the major function of the planter. You must have good soil to seed contact in order to get that seedling to germinate. One other unit that's on the planter are the drive wheels, and they're located inside the planter units. Basically, their function as the planter moves along the ground, they turn and they basically power the individual row units where they actually meter the seeds out. So Darol, how does one go about adjusting these toolbars? I know we need to run them level, because if we tilt the front or tilt the back, it's either going to raise our planter units out of the ground, or it's going to put extra pressure on our press wheels.
That's right.
So how do you go about doing that?
Depends on the planter, first off. This is a 3-point hitch planter. So once you get it attached to the tractor, you'll want to use your top link, and these wheels we talked about earlier that you said drives everything, these wheels also carry everything. So they're the ones that takes care of everything on these units and on this toolbar. So with the top link and these wheels, you can set your height and your tilt of the toolbar to make sure these 4-link connections are running level.
So,
and that takes care of this running level.
So if we tilt too much rearward, then it causes a lot more pressure.
It out of the ground and puts undue pressure on your press wheel,
which could actually cause compaction around the seedling. And if I'm tilted towards the rear, then the Coulter, it's picked up, and you don't get any tillage effect from that absolute Coulter.
Minimal.
But if you go too far the other direction and actually have the front of the planter tilted down, then your Coulter actually can go too deep.
You put undue depth on it, and you've actually taken pressure off your press wheels then.
So then you don't have that good seed to soil contact.
Exactly. The idea is this whole unit rocks on your depth wheels and your double disc openers.
So that rotation is held constant or held in correct position when the toolbar
That's
is level.
correct. And the other thing is, even with a trailer mounted, we've talked about the 3-point hitch, but a trailer mounted acts the same way, but it does it at the tongue. So once you've chosen your tractor and you know what your drawbar height's going to be, then when you hook a trailer mounted up, if you're slightly running downhill to the tractor, then you really need to pull the bolts on your clevis hitch or the eye hitch, whatever's on your particular planter, and lower that so you can raise the tongue up still while it's hooked to the planter, and you level your toolbar on a trailer mount. Same thing as we do with a top link in these wheels. You'll do with a trailer mount, you just do it at the tongue instead of at the 3-point hitch.
So regardless of the planter type, key component is to run that unit level.
That's the way these units here are made. They're made to run level, and the only way to do that with a 4-link system is to make sure your toolbar runs level.
So,
or at least starts out that way.
So when your toolbar is level, then the 4-bar linkage along the side should be somewhat level in comparison with the toolbar itself.
That's right.
And I know we're sitting here in conditions that we wouldn't be in the field, and we're slightly elevated, but the point is we want our 4-bar linkage basically to be running level, and that's associated with the connection to the toolbar.
Right. And you'll notice that the reason we say start out on a level place, we've gotten off of a level place here on purpose, because this is how you'll run in the field. And you'll notice that we're slightly off. We're not just exactly level. We started out that way because when we set it up on level ground. But because when you go out in actual planting conditions, it won't be perfect, but you want to start out perfect. And you'll notice that even though this is dropped, the toolbar is actually, the 4-link is actually lower in the front than it is in the back. The unit's still level.
The unit's not in the ground.
You know, it's still running level, and that's what you want. So the 4-link is doing its job now that you've leveled this. Now the only thing is left is each individual component according to your seed crop. Now we need to get all them adjusted to where they need to be.
Okay. The first attachment adjustment on a planter after we get our toolbar leveled are these things here that are referred to as row cleaners. Their primary function is to remove previous crop residue away from where our Coulter will be operating. So some people operate those things too low, and they actually becoming tillage devices, and that is not the intent of a row cleaner.
Absolutely.
The row cleaner's primary function and only function is remove the crop residue from a previous crop away, so our no-till Coulter can actually cut through the residue or remaining residue and open up a slot such that the double disc openers can actually create the furrow and open up a slot for the seed to drop. Now, Darol, on these row cleaners, how does one go about adjusting those? I noticed there's a hole over here with a pin through it. Do you just physically raise and lower that?
Once you get in the ground, once your unit's in the ground, then you will adjust that one to where it's sweeping, not digging.
So
I recommend not ever letting the row cleaner dig in the ground.
So you only want it to clean residue.
You want it to comb the tracks to the side so the Coulter and the double disc have a clean path to go through.
So it's a cleaner, not a tiller.
That's exactly right. And the thing about it is you can do that by pulling one pin. You pull the pin, set the spikes on the ground, then raise them to the next hole up. Whether it's a half a hole, a quarter a hole, whatever, just raise them. Stick your pin in, and from that point on, they should just sweep the ground. The trash itself will make them operate. You won't use the ground to make them operate. That's a lot of people's misconception. They think they need them rolling on the ground for the ground to make them operate, and that's not true. If you're in heavy residue, the residue itself will make them operate.
So after our row cleaners have performed their function, the next component on the planter is the no-till Coulter.
That's right.
And its primary job is to basically create a slit and basically slice, if there's any residue left, slice through that residue and also create an opening so the double disc openers can create that furrow, that double disc opening, such that seed can be metered out and dropped in.
To me, it takes a lot of pressure off the double disc opening. The Coulter, there's people that run without them. And the double disc will cut its own furrow, but it's under a lot more stress to do it on its own. It can do it. It's sharp. It'll cut you if you mess with them. But the double disc the no-till Coulter is heavy made, has little either ripple cuts, or you can get them in ripples, or this bubble disc. And all they'll do is they'll just kind of vibrate the ground a little bit. As they have a straight edge to cut, but then they'll vibrate the ground a little bit to loosen soil.
So they do some
just works so much easier.
So they do some very minimal
tillage, and that puts the double disc in a lot less stress, in my opinion.
So with the planter level and our row cleaners adjusted, how do you adjust
the depth of the no-till cut? Keep your double disc openers really have to be set at the same time that you're doing your depth wheels, because basically it's always been my thoughts that your no-till Coulter needs to be about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch deeper, just minimal depth beyond seed bed. So once you determine by crop how deep your double disc openers are going, then you want to set your no-till Coulter just 1/2 to 3/4 inch deeper. So you have to know one in order to do the other.
So how do you set the depth?
They have an adjustment back here on the back. I don't know if you can get to where you can see that or not. It's a handle and a set of notches in the frame that activates these wheels. It stops them at certain positions.
So you adjust the spring force.
And it adjusts. It's not really a spring force. It's like it's a little cast piece in there that catches the side axles of these wheels. So it only lets them go so far.
Okay.
So when they do it in 1/4 inch increments, you can go as shallow as 1/4 of an inch.
Okay, so Darol,
and it can go as deep as, I don't know, probably 3 inches.
So Darol, so that brings up a question. So our toolbar is level. We've adjusted back to there. What keeps the planter pushed down on the ground?
Good thing you asked. I'm remiss because I missed that. You have a set of springs on the toolbar that is attached to the unit right here.
Mm-hmm.
These arms are also attached, and this handle adjusts these arms. So when the planter is all the way up, you have the opportunity to set this handle and get whatever tension on them springs you need to hold this unit. And this is important, at least it is to me. You want this unit constantly on the ground with no bounce while traveling.
So if this was adjusted correctly, if I tried to turn these depth wheels, I should not be able to turn those.
You should not be able to turn them.
If they're adjusted incorrectly, I would be able to turn this, showing that there's no contact with the ground.
And which also means that you're not getting the desired depth that you want.
So we've got adjustments back to our depth wheels, which in effect is the seed depth. Followed by that, after the seed is dropped into the furrow, then we have these closing wheels.
Right.
Now, those closing wheels have an adjustment on those also, don't they?
They do. And they have their own individual. It's a spring that's separate from the actual unit, because you need to be able to adjust this absolutely on the fly according to your ground, whether it's bad wet, whether it's way dry. Everything affects these. You also have different types of press wheels. You see cast iron on here. They make a plastic wheel with a rubber lining on it. They also make spike wheels, or a sheep's foot wheel, whatever how you want to say it. But you have several different types of press wheels. And each one's job, regardless of what it is to cave soil back off into that V seed furrow, and then press enough pressure to make your seed soil contact, which is, in our estimation, is very important.
Without compacting the soil.
Without compaction. And these are made for very dry soils, because they'll cave that hard ground off and then pack it back off. And the rubber ones are made for not so, maybe even damp soils, where it doesn't take much just to lay it off and press it in. And the spike wheels are made, to me, are made for crops that are hard to get out of the ground because they do not press the entire length of your row. It's hitting spots. So it also leaves spots that are loose soil that a weak crop can get out of.
And it also, those spoke type press wheels actually fracture the sidewalls because in cases, your double wheels can actually, in some cases, folks refer that it's slicking the sides of the furrow, and basically those spike wheels will actually fracture that and reduce the compaction and give you better seed to soil contact.
That's right. And what they found out is because they're a slick disc, and they do, in certain conditions, they'll slick the sidewalls off, and when they dry, roots can't penetrate them. So your roots end up running the length of the furrow instead of being able to penetrate the sidewalls and get in the rest, spread out like they're supposed to. They're actually just running the furrow because that's the easiest way to go.
So
and
it's reducing.
We'll tear that up and let that, make that easy.
So it gives you better root penetration.
Right.
So Darol, if you were pulling this unit into the field, can you kind of summarize and go back through how you'd set the planter up? Now that we know the adjustment, what order would you do?
The first thing I'm going to do is the top link and the wheels.
So you're going to level your toolbar.
On a good level spot and level the toolbar and make sure that it's level for the units.
Okay, such that your 4-bar linkage is level and running with
Everything
the
is
toolbar.
level.
So after you get that, what would be your next step?
The next step is actually the down pressure and the weight, which is the springs we talked about earlier. And you want to make sure that whether it's no-till or conventional, if it's conventional, you don't need any. You wouldn't even need the weight. It'll take care of itself. But if you're going to do no-till, then you need to make sure that you penetrate, and you need to make sure it's constant, and you need to make sure it don't bounce when you're up to speed in the field. So you want to apply enough pressure to keep this unit on the ground when them wheels are on the ground, and you need to do it in a way that you don't pick these wheels back up off the ground. So you end up adding weight. Once you get your pressure to the unit, you need to make sure you have weight on here to keep these wheels on the ground all the time.
So your drive wheels must stay in contact with the soil surface.
That affects your seed placement. If they get up and skip or whatever, then you're not planting seed until they make contact again. So you want them in contact just like these units all the time.
So after you've adjusted the down pressure on the unit, which in effect controls the depth wheels, which in effect controls the seed depth into the furrow, you'll finish that off by adjusting.
Well, once I've done that, make sure my pressure and the weight and everything is level, I'll set my depth according to my crop.
So
whether it's cotton.
So it's dependent on the crop.
Whether it's cotton or corn, soybean, all of them go in at a different depth. It's the way they are. Cotton is one of the crops I talked about that's hard to get out of the ground. It needs an easy way out. Beans, not so much, and corn, not so much. Corn's the deepest crop we plant. And so once you decide your depth and you set this, then you have to go back and set your no-till Coulter.
Oh,
and you set it according to the depth you've chosen.
So again, everything must be in unison like a fine orchestra.
That's right.
You can't adjust one thing without it affecting something else.
And once you do that, you set this one, like we said earlier, a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch deeper than your final seed bed, because you want that loose dirt down there. You want the slit to be deep enough and for it to be widened enough that the double disc just lays you a furrow out and puts the seed right there in the bottom of it.
So how much pressure do you put on your closing wheels?
I start out light. And you have like 4 notches on these new style closing wheels. So I start out light. And if it doesn't quite close, then I'll add a notch. But don't start out at the heaviest, because the heaviest is only, if in certain conditions, is only going to compact the soil around your seed. And you're not even giving it a chance. You're not checking to see what it needs. You're just slamming it back there and saying, that'll cover it. But if you start out light, if it's not quite covering, just add a notch. And if it takes up, then stop right there. Don't keep adding weight. Or down pressure, just keep and go with that.
So, Darol, what you've indicated is the adjustments for I'm going to call it optimum conditions. So if we go back through the unit and conditions change, so let's suppose we have a very dry year. Unlike this year, suppose we have a very dry year, and we both know the drier it is in miling, the harder the ground gets.
Exactly.
So what kind of adjustments would you do to offset the hardness to get the planter to go in the ground?
Well, I mean, it will tell you itself, the planter will. The harder the ground gets, the less penetration you're getting with the downforce that you've added. So you will need to add, in order to get your good penetration, your good depth, you'll have to add down pressure. And in a lot of cases in the drier years, when you add down pressure and it starts picking up on this wheel, you're going to have to add a little weight.
So again, one adjustment affects other thing. So if I've got a lot of down pressure and my toolbar is not holding down and keeping that wheel in contact, I'm not planting.
You're not planting.
So I'm going to have to add additional ballast to my toolbar in order to keep it in contact with the ground.
Always remember, the same with the units and the drive wheels. Constant contact has to be.
So as I've heard a lot of folks, once you pull the planter out of the shed and get ready for this year's crop, one setting serves all. Is that true?
No. No, if you start out in wet conditions, all of this stuff will be substantially lighter because you're literally running in soil that's giving you no resistance. But like you just said, you get later in the year and we've dried out, the ground's firmed up, literally gotten harder. The adjustments you made out of the shed in order to get through the field, not the same adjustments you'll run now.
So
everything's changed.
So a good operator is going to constantly check their seed placement, their seed depth, and make sure they're getting covered and adjust their planters accordingly.
Exactly.